Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. This video is all about the Elo rating system. It's either used currently or has been used in the past by a lot of different games. To the point, I think it's fair to call it one of, if not the standard when it comes to multiplayer ladders. Even games that don't use it directly often have something heavily influenced by it. Microsoft's TrueSkill system would be a good example of that. Now, to start with a bit of history, people sometimes call it ELO, but that's just a band. We know it's actually pronounced Elo because it was created by a guy whose last name was Elo. He originally did it with chess in mind specifically, but its flexibility allows it to be used in pretty much any player versus player game. To start with something you probably already know, in the system everybody gets a number, which the system then uses to predict your odds of beating someone else based on the difference between your number and theirs. It's important to understand it's not saying a higher rated player will definitely win, it's really all about probability. A major assumption in Elo is that everyone has a skill level, but their individual performance in a game is normally distributed around that, meaning usually you'll play at about your average skill, but everyone can also have good or bad games. And a worse player having a great game can beat a better player who's just not having a good one. In theory, a player that's 100 points higher than another is expected to win 64% of the time. A player 200 points higher should win 76% of the time. At 300 points, it's 85%, and at 400 points, the way the math works out, the higher rated player should be exactly 10 times more likely to win. To put it another way, in 11 games, you'd expect someone 400 points lower to win once. I think it might surprise some people that with an Elo system working as intended, an 1800 has a 15% chance of beating a 2100. It's a little different in chess because draws are a possible outcome and account for a large proportion of non-wins, whereas in Age of Empires, for example, there are only wins and losses. It's really not a big deal though in terms of the math, and just means 100 points represents a slightly larger skill gap in games that the winner has to not only avoid losing, but also avoid a draw. And just to touch on the math for a second and get a bit more technical, the formulas work by exchanging a number of points after a game based on the difference between the two players' ratings, and therefore the expected probability for each one to win. In this case, the E's represent the expected probability of each player winning based on the difference in their score, and the R's represent the ratings of player A and B. After the game, the new rating, R prime, is the old rating and some K value multiplied by the outcome, either 1 for a win or 0 for a loss, or in chess, 0.5 for a draw. The K value here is basically the maximum amount that can be won or lost in a single game, and determines how quickly your score can change. The K value and starting rating can be really set to anything, though some numbers tend to be more popular. For master chess players, the K value is 16, and for more average chess players or Age of Empires players, it's 32. The higher it is, the faster your rating can change. With a K value of 32, that means for two evenly matched players, both having an expectation of winning half the time, the winner will gain 16 points in a win, and the other player will lose the same amount. In a normal Elo rating system, the points are always balanced in any exchange. A common misconception is that you can exchange points equal to the K value, but that only happens when the players have a huge gap between them, and there's an incredible upset. Evenly matched players will exchange half the K value. In this game, for example, I was basically evenly matched with someone at the start, and after losing, I went down 16 points. In another game, I played against someone about 100 points higher than me. He should theoretically beat me 64% of the time, and the formula accounts for that by only giving him 12 points if he wins. That means you can't keep beating up on weaker players to raise your rating forever. The points you'd gain from that would diminish over time. On the other hand, if you're 100 points higher and lose, that should only happen 36% of the time, so 20 points are exchanged, which is what happened in that particular game. He had much more on the line than I did, but also a very good chance of winning, assuming our ratings were accurate. And that's one of the things that makes Elo such a good system. It's self-correcting. You can't just pile up wins against weak players, or you'll be at it for a really long time. And if you do inflate your rating with a win streak, and you happen to lose against someone lower down, you'll fall an extra long way. Likewise, you can feel free to play people above your skill level, losing more than half your games, and still rise over time to your true rating. Another great feature of the system is it can even handle team games. All it has to do is calculate the average elo for each team and treats those as two different players. Once the results are in, it can use the same formula and then just divide the points evenly between the players on each team. For example, in an evenly matched 4 vs 4 game, the team might get 16 points, but it's split 4 ways, so the players all lose or gain 4 points. The smaller the teams, the more likely the result is a reflection on your personal ability, and likewise, the more points you stand to gain or lose. It takes the hassle out of manually balancing teams, because if one team does end up being 100 points higher on average, they stand to only gain 3 points for a win or lose 5. The one flaw is that unless you're changing the formula in some way, it's not taking the individual's contribution into account. If your team wins, it doesn't matter if you were the MVP or if you sat in the corner farming the whole time. You get the same number of points. But while we're on the topic of limitations, there are a few others to point out. First of all, one issue is that the system takes a bit of time to find your true rating. At the start of an account, it doesn't know where to put you, so there's some starting elo that you're assigned based on no information. Depending on your skill level, that might be way too high or low. Probably too high if you're new to the game, so there's often an adjustment period where you rocket straight up with people calling you a smurf along the way, or more commonly, you head straight down, inflating other people's ratings along the way. In Age of Empires, a pro player making a practice account and someone who's trying the game for the first time both start at 1600 points on Steam and 1200 points on Voobly. Something that might be cool is if before people go online, they had to play 5 games against an AI that adapts in difficulty until it can sort of guess what level you're at and give you a reasonably accurate starting elo. I'd certainly be interested in seeing if that would work. At the moment, there's a bit of a stigma with having either of those starting ratings, and it can be hard to find people willing to play against you at first. Another disadvantage to the elo system is that it's internally consistent, but not externally. What I mean by that is it ranks people relative to each other, but not a set standard. In the case of Age of Empires, and even more so in games that are more recent, the player base tends to improve overall every year, which leads to something called rating deflation. That's where you have to become better over time just to get to the same rating. On the other hand, in chess, it's widely suggested that the opposite is happening, and ratings at the moment are inflated at the top levels. In either case, it makes it difficult to compare the ranking of active players now and players who got their ranking earlier against a different set of competition. If you're interested in other ranking systems, there are more complex ones like the Glicko or Elo systems, which take your ratings variability into account, percentile-based systems like Ingo, the TrueSkill system, which is an Elo variation, which tries to account for individual performance on a team. And then, of course, there are other games which are just more secretive about their rating systems, and we're not really sure what exactly they use. So guys, I hope that gives you a nice overview and answered some of your questions. I think the big takeaway is don't worry too much about your rating or playing against people better than you. It all works out if you just keep playing. Trust in the math. But anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.